Welcome. Today I'd like to talk a little bit about humor. I'm wondering if you heard the one about the Dalai Lama and Stephen Jobs and a talent management professional came to a bar in Tahiti. I haven't heard that either, but I'm sure there's an interesting ending to that. Humor is controversial. In 1991, when Mike Lombardo and I surveyed all of the research on what makes managers and leaders successful, one of the 67 characteristics that ended up in the leadership architect or the career architect competency list was humor. We have been assaulted over the years by other professionals who say that humor is an attribute, doesn't belong as a competency for a leader. It is not a requirement. And I'd like to argue today that that's not true. I don't accept that. So I want to talk a little bit about humor. What we know from the research is that humor has personal benefits to the manager or leader that uses humor. There are benefits for others. And there's a positive impact on the team, particularly in presentations and meetings and problem-solving sessions. The research actually says that if you take two managers or two leaders and they do pretty much exactly the same thing, and one of them uses humor while doing it and the other doesn't, there's a 25 to 33% increase in effectiveness for the person that uses humor while they're managing or while they're leading. The key to use humor as a tool of leadership is to use humor productively, that is, never to harm others. There's humor that hurts and humor that's funny. It's also important to learn, and this is an EQ skill, to match humor to the setting and to the audience. We all know that there's some aspects to humor that sort of goes well with a certain audience and then not with another audience. A third characteristic of using humor as a tool is to appreciate the humor of others. So there's one thing being humorous yourself, but the other is to show an appreciation for humor being provided by others. And then the last aspect is being relaxed and open when humor is directed to you. That is, when you're being made fun of in a productive way, to respond properly to that. And we'll talk a bit about that. If you talk about what does it do for the person providing the humor, it enhances reputation, presence, and impact. Presenters at conference board who use humor during a presentation get higher ratings. It can also humanize somebody who's a cold, sort of steady state presenter with no dynamics. People who use humor are easier to listen to and learn from. Using humor is actually an EQ skill, so it makes one more skilled in EQ in general if you learn how to use humor. It also means that people look forward to hearing you. They may, in fact, attend a voluntary presentation that they've seen you present before. So if there's humor in your presentation style. It also communicates things like confidence, warmth, approachability, self-awareness, and especially the willingness to self-disclose if you use self-humor. Humor is something that we call a saving grace. And a saving grace is something that balances out a negative characteristic. So if you're too strong or too loud or too direct and you intimidate people, if in fact you have a productive sense of humor that you can insert in an otherwise difficult message presentation, that can be a lubricant or an elixir to cancel out or balance a negative point. If you think about humor as it impacts others, it reduces fear and tension. It invites people to offer more input. So managers and leaders who use humor tend to get people talking more. It relaxes some that are intimidated by the presenter. Teams are more engaged if they're in a humor setting. It actually enhances memory if you use humor while you're making an important point. That helps imprint on the brain the point you're trying to make if you deliver it in a humorous way. And it just humorizes the whole organization. Now, there are naturally humorous people and there aren't. So in a population, it's probably a third of people are funny and humorous in a variety of settings, and a third are just overly serious and cold and phlegmatic and flat. So for those who are naturally humorous, it's a matter of using a skill you already have and applying it to be a manager or a leader. It turns out that humor can be taught as a skill to cold people. In my entire 60 years in the business of talent management, I have come across consultancies that are dedicated to teach managers and executives humor. And they're very good at it. And you can learn to be more humorous. And you can learn how to use humor productively. So if you are not funny and you're not the person that tells the humorous stories at parties, and you're not the one to come up with a quick humorous statement, you can go to school on humor and you can get better at humor. Some of the research findings: humor about self is very effective. That is, especially if the humor acknowledges foibles and admits flaws that you have. It's always funny for a leader to get up and say, "As you know, I love these long meetings." Well, everybody in the audience knows that's not true. And you get a beginning laugh, people loosen up, your brains get more open. So even beginning a meeting with an anti-self joke, as you know, we don't use the term hair in this meeting, is one that I can use. Oddly enough, Dilbert's your best friend. So in presentations, Dilbert, the cartoon series Dilbert, you can use up to 5 Dilbert cartoons in your presentations if you go look at the Dilbert site. I wanted to get a Dilbert cartoon for every one of the 67 competencies in Luminger. And there are 67 appropriate cartoons. The Dilbert organization wouldn't allow that. They wouldn't even sell me the right. So Dilbert has cartoons about every situation you can imagine in business. So you can buy a book of cartoons, Dilbert cartoons, and use up to 5 of them in your presentation to make points and to add humor. We also know that personal stories that put you vulnerable work a lot. So if you've got a life story where you failed, or a life story where you made a political faux pas. In my case, Bill Gates kicked me out of Microsoft, which is a story that I tell, a real one. Still is a little painful, but it is funny. So just to think of a personal anecdote that might be funny. And the other thing is to laugh along with others, and we talked about that. So especially in presentations, humor holds the audience attention. It makes your presentation more memorable. It reinforces your key points and increases the chance that there's a positive impression of you as a presenter, a manager, and a leader. So Mike and I and Roger in TalentTelligent continue to argue that humor is a legitimate management and leadership skill. So I want you all to make up an ending to the story we started with of 3 people coming to a bar, and see if you can come up with a humorous ending. Good luck with that.